right, hello again, episode 12, long time no chatter. Maybe you're loving this so much, you're just zipping through these episodes. And that's great. That's lovely. We do encourage you to sit back, have a snack, hydrate, always hydrate.
Absolutely.
Whatever time of year it is. Maybe this is in the fall and you're enjoying a little, I don't know, pumpkin latte. I don't know. Maybe a pancake, or maybe it's, morning breakfast pancake. Maybe it's near Christmas. I don't know, but we're glad you're here listening to this, and we welcome your feedback. Now we're still, Paul and I are not being efficient because I promised that we would talk about my testimony in this episode, if you will, if you want to call it that, my personal experience with this episode of that being nothing in the dark. And also we were going to talk about the Cassandra syndrome. Well, we're still talking about this. And so the Cassandra syndrome, for a variety of reasons, we were touching on, and we kind of finished up on this on episode 11, that, hey, have we ever had our own personal Cassandra syndrome experience? And we both decided we probably do, and we'd love to maybe explore that. But we don't want to just kind of do it in an ad hoc way, so we'll probably touch on that. Also, for those who have had those views out there in the listening audience who've had it, that'd be great to hear from you at drrobsullivan.com, the website. That was great, and we'll also have some other ways to connect through that. Also, you could connect through our all the social media that we have as well, all the platforms, as we respond to some of our micro content or just some other thoughts that we're throwing out there, because we'll probably put this out there on wherever, Facebook for our more mature listeners, I guess, and then or maybe Instagram, TikTok, or whatever. Just what is your experience with this now that you have a better understanding of it? And
what's your Cassandra moment?
Yeah, what's your Cassandra syndrome moment? What's your Cassandra? I'm trying to think of good alliteration. Your Cassandra conundrum. We'll work on that.
Crisis. Cassandra crisis.
Your Cassandra crisis. Yeah, what's your Cassandra crisis? And we'd love to hear that, and try to do your best to slander anyone and say, well, my Cassandra crisis, because all the idiots I went to school with, we may end up doing that. But also, Paul and I were talking between episodes, and we were like, okay, there's so many other Twilight Zone episodes that are really great episodes. This is our first thought that can fit on this. So that's thought number one. And so we're just going to kind of touch on those briefly, because these are some apex predator episodes that
absolutely
deserve their own Wonkyfied episode. Christian nerdism episode. Number two, this is a trope that we'll come back to, and then and it's something we can kind of set the table for, not just in Twilight Zone, but other shows as well. And number three, we're kind of seeing that this might be just a connecting thread throughout the Twilight Zone. In most episodes, it might be the best example of that fate worse than death that I mentioned when we introduced this way back in episode 4 or 5. That when I introduced the Twilight Zone, I said so often these people are the protagonists are facing fates worse than death. Well, this would be an example where no one believes you, and you know you're right, whether that's a sane thought or not. You're like, I know I'm right, I just can't convince anyone. So and so there are those, and obviously, I guess I just thought of a fourth one, but also there's this. This is something again that can connect us to it's something we'll speak back to this episode when we talk about future properties and future
absolutely
shows. So there was a couple of episodes that you get thrown at me, Paul, that you thought were great examples.
And so up to this point, especially as we talked about the Cassandra syndrome, we've been thinking about it in terms of being the narrative inside the storyline, where, was Wanda crazy, or did she truly see the reality of what was happening? In terms of, and I don't know the character's name, in terms of Bill Shatner and 20,000 Terror 20,000 Feet, he obviously saw something, no one believed him, but yet he was stuck with that. So we talked about it in terms of inside the narrative, and we talked about how that leaves unsettling feelings in the story.
Right.
But they resolve within the story. I think the most compelling episodes of this Twilight Zone series, the ones that truly leave you unsettled as a viewer, are the ones that put you in the position almost of Cassandra, where you have to watch, or we as watchers have to see everything unfold, knowing full well the truth of what's happening. And unfortunately, the players in the episode don't. We have no way to communicate to them. Unfortunately, we have no way. See people yelling at the TV screen, "Don't go in there!"
Yeah,
we can't do that, and so we have to watch as these things unfold. And a couple of episodes that really stood out to me, and there's so many. This is when you start thinking about this, is really a common trope. But like we had talked about Eye of the Beholder, just briefly last episode, where like you said, they do a great job of really hiding and masking the truth. You see the main character, who's played by Ellie Mae Clampett, Donna Douglas.
Donna Douglas. She'll always be Ellie Mae Clampett.
Yeah, that's all I know her in. But you see her, who, by modern standards, or at least by contemporary standards, was, attractive, young, healthy, bandaged up, as a victim, or not a victim, but someone who'd undergone like 11 or 12 surgeries. And all you hear is the doctor say, well, the surgeries didn't take, she's still a horrible lump of flesh. They pull the bandages off and it's her, but again, kind of this beauty standard by today's standards.
And just to clarify, all the doctors and the nurses seriously had pig snouts.
Yeah. And then up to that point,
they're normal. Yeah.
They've turned, and now it's like, now they're these horrific figures. And
right.
So we're left with, we can see the dynamics of what's going on.
Yeah.
And it leaves a very unsettling feeling. Another great one that we had talked about previously toward the beginning of this was To Serve Man. This, these alien races that come down that say, hey, we're here to help you. We're
right.
here to bring you peace and prosperity. And they build this almost like intergalactic skyway where people can travel to their home planet all the time and live in peace and harmony. And they leave behind this book that they are able to translate. And again, we see what's coming. They translate it to serve man. So they think, oh, this is great. They're going to serve us in our own hubris, until they translate at the end, it's a cookbook.
Yeah.
And all along, you're knowing you shouldn't trust them. You shouldn't trust them. You shouldn't trust them. And ultimately, we're left with this unsettling feeling because no one listened to us in the armchair.
Yeah. And so I think that's an interesting trope that you're mentioning, the viewer.
Yeah.
As the Cassandra syndrome, the viewers going through their own personal Cassandra
Absolutely.
syndrome. Because, and again, you wonder, okay, why do I think that? Because in To Serve Man, the aliens are really tall, but they seem very benevolent and kind, but you just, and I wonder, why do we think, and this is one of the interesting questions, why do we as viewers immediately assume that they intend harm, or in this case, lunch? What's the, why are we like that? And is it maybe just because we're watching the Twilight Zone and we know there's a twist? I mean, I guess that could be it.
Maybe so. But then, we also have, take Time Enough at Last. Most people can say that as they're watching this, they probably know what's going to happen. Now, granted, maybe not the nuances of it, but I think you're right. I think because we go into it knowing there's got to be something here. There's no way this is going to end up well. But yet, we see the character of Harold Bemis, who's thinking, my life is set. This is heaven for me. No one around to bother me. All the books I want. Here we go. And then all of a sudden we know, oh, nope, it's going to get all taken away from you. And so we have to watch this man's heartbreak in real time as he realizes what should have been an ideal paradise is now, a living nightmare. And we're stuck seeing this unfold. And I think that's why these episodes stay with us so much.
Yeah.
That's why they just, none of us get that resolution that we want.
And you feel just a slight, I guess you shouldn't though, because most of the people who watched it when it was these episodes first came out are, no longer among the living, most of them. But you do have this little sense of, man, wouldn't it have been great to actually have, because by the time we start consuming some of these episodes, there's few except like Nothing in the Dark. I'd never seen it, didn't know anything about it. And when I first started watching the Twilight Zone, there were several, I didn't know the outcomes for a lot of them, but now at this point it's become so ingrained that so many of these episodes, like most people know what to serve man,
right.
what the verb serve means, in that sense. Most of these twists and tropes they're accustomed to, right? And so, but yeah, if you're consuming it for the first time, or for whatever reason you haven't, you don't know about this, it is, you do kind of assume something bad's going to happen, because again, it's the Twilight Zone, and you just kind of have that sense. But I think part of it also was this sense that things are not as it seem, and that's another part of this. For in the Cassandra syndrome, there is this, for the vast majority, things are not as they seem, right?
Right.
And so that has to be a critical piece of the Cassandra syndrome to exist, and that breeds. And so, therefore, the Cassandra syndrome there's a paranoid aspect to it, right?
Absolutely.
That's really what it is. You
won't believe me. So,
right.
I mean, that's where the paranoia stems from.
And it's not just that. And there's another one. I need to think of the episode, but might have been just 3 astronauts, but it's the 3 astronauts who come back in the hospital, and they slowly start disappearing. And once they disappear, it's like they never existed.
Mm-hmm.
And so when the other, like, there's two left, and they go, well, where's, they're like, what's happened to Anderson or whatever? Mm-hmm. I need to go back once, but it's really good and it's well acted. And everybody's like, what are you talking about? There's only 2. And you look in the newspaper, newspapers have covered it, right? Because it's right. Big deal in the late. This was, I think, first season or second season, so it's a big deal. Obviously, the astronauts had landed and come back and all that. And you look at the newspaper, and it was 3, and then it says 2, and this is 1, and so like,
imagine being that last one standing, knowing, no, they actually did live and exist.
And then you also know. That's if it happened to them, it's gonna happen to me. So but that one's where the protagonist and the audience are together. This one we're talking about the audience is the one experiencing their own personal Cassandra syndrome. Absolutely. And I think it's probably one of the things about Nothing in the Dark that's really compelling, though. The timing of it, I was, we talked about you accepted Christ later.
Yep, I was 27.
Okay, so I was 19, which is, by the numbers, that's older than average. And so I was a freshman in college, and so that was like towards the end of, like, in April. I walked, baptized, and all that. I prayed prayer. Playing basketball with some friends. Well, they weren't friends at the time, but they became friends. And so I saw this episode. I swear it was like, I was home. Being home from college that first year is kind of a surreal experience anyway, because you're trying to adjust. It has its own Twilight Zone aspect, right? You're like, it's disorienting because you're like, okay, for the first time in my life, I was fully on my own, and that means I'm at a different realm, a different phase in my life, and I can come back here and be home, but it's not really, I'm just a different person. And it's kind of different from Christmas, because Christmas, you're just there for it. You're there for a month, and it's like, it's temporary, but here you're here for an extended period.
Yeah.
It's home, but
that's stark reality of what I do.
Right. But then I also was a different person, because I accepted Jesus and still as a babe in Christ. And so I saw this episode probably Yeah, 3 or 4 weeks after that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so it's very personal because, again, it's not just about, aliens or whatever. It's about death.
Yeah.
And so I felt a sense of God saying, this is kind of how you need that needs to be your perspective of death. And it's still, and I think the angel, Robert Redford, says it perfectly. And, hopefully we can look at the scene where he says, you're afraid because it's the unknown.
Yeah. You're not afraid of me.
Right. You just don't know what's going to be like. And then there's a beautiful scene where he takes her hand and shows her respect. And then you see her and she's already gone. And so it flips that Cassandra syndrome, I think, in a sense, because we as the audience, in most Cassandra syndrome's examples in Twilight Zone, we know something bad's going to happen, even though the characters who don't realize they're in a show called The Twilight Zone think everything's good.
Yeah.
Good is going to happen. Something's going to happen. That they don't realize something's coming. It's the same outcome, but flipped, because it was Wanda was expecting this to be death and to be awful, and it's not, and it's over. And now the only and she realizes the only thing she had to fear was the unknown. So it's a beautiful way to see, especially if you're a newborn in Christ, to think about death. And so and obviously that was, and when you're 19 years old, you're usually not thinking about it, but when you accept Jesus, you kind of get a little philosophical about that. And I've always kind of had this these philosophical aspect, even when I was younger, about death. And so it really kind of hammered home how God, I think, would have us look at it and say, there's just this unknown aspect and you have to trust me on that.
Right.
And then there's some other things, like obviously I was, when I saw the episode that was just a couple years removed from a movie that Redford was in called The Natural, which is like another surreal, it's based on a book by Bernard Malamud, and it doesn't go the direction of the book towards the end at all, but it was a real fun, I'd seen it my senior year in high school, and it was one of my favorites. And so Redford was very much in the middle of his stardom phase. Maybe towards, he was in his mid-40s at the time, but when I saw this episode, but he was still very much Robert Redford. Yeah. So to women, he didn't look that much different than he did. He probably looked better in his 46 than he did in 22. Yeah. So there's that aspect too. But I also just the way, it really is, to me, it's not surprising that Robert Redford, that Harold is deaf. That's not shocking because there's only so many options, really.
Right.
This mean landlord that turns out to not, or construction guy turns out to be very nice and just caring, or the police officer, the wounded police officer, and or there isn't a personification of death.
Yeah.
Which you assume, since Twilight Zone is going to be bad. But then you think once the twist is, to me, once you figure out, and once he says, yes, I'm deaf. The twist is that, I'm deaf, and usually you expect Twilight Zone that's going to be a horrific experience.
Yeah, like this monster or something.
But it's beautiful.
Yes.
It's a beautiful scene. He takes her hands and they walk off, and he shows her the care that she has not received from a human probably in decades, much to doing. And she realizes that the fate worse than death that we've been talking about was her existence, right? It was her life. She was maybe in the Twilight Zone. And maybe that's maybe she wasn't crazy. Maybe she wasn't sane. Maybe she had not seen death, but maybe she was kind of in her own little Twilight Zone before death came and rescued her. Does that sound weird? But that's to me that's from a faith and Christian perspective, kind of how we should see it, right?
Well, and I think that you are hitting on something that's so beautiful in this transitionary scene, especially as we compare it to the Hitchhiker. In the Hitchhiker, we have death. Nan sees him, realizes what it is, and it's more of this kind of firm, just uncomfortable resoluteness. I have to accept I'm dead. In the case of Nothing in the Dark, you see this beautiful example where Robert Redford's death, like you said, takes her hand, calls her mother, comes, gently takes her arm in arm, and they walk out in the sunlight. And I definitely think it's a stark contrast. But back to the Christian theological side of it, I think about this. I think about Paul talking in 1 Corinthians 15, where he talks about the removal of the pain of death through sin. When sin is gone, oh, death, where is your sting? Where is your pain? The pain of death is sin. When sin is removed, there is no more pain of death. There is nothing else to fear. And I think this is a great example. Even he says, he being Harold, death, says, why does it have to be an ending when it's truly just a beginning? And that, I think, is the truest line that we as Christians hold to. Death is not an ending. Death is truly a beginning. This life that we have is not, this is, in an eternal timeline, this isn't even the trailer. This is not what life is. And as Paul points us to that, as this body of mortality takes on immortality, when this body of flesh takes on the spiritual, then we truly see what life is. And I think that you're right. So many people live with this, and I would even say, this is going to sound pejorative, but prideful sense of hanging on to life.
Yeah.
I want to hang on to life. That's a very prideful mindset. In fact, I would even say that Wanda, in her sense, was very prideful in that I can beat death by staying away from it. And ultimately, she, one could look at it and say, well, she had to face her inevitable end. Yes. But it was how she faced it that made this episode so much different, as opposed to, like, say, Nan, who just had to firmly resolute say, okay, well, let me pick up the hitchhiker and just ride off in the afterlife. Harold and Wanda connected in such a way that said, let me show you what's out there.
Again, another important programming note. Wanda gets to go with Robert Redford. And so that probably makes it.
Yeah. I've often wondered, and I didn't bring this up, but I often wondered if, was it Ingrid Stevens or yeah. If Ingrid Stevens, if the hitchhiker was Robert Redford, if it would have been a totally different episode. And that sounds a little tongue in cheek, but actuality, I mean, think about the scenario. The woman made presumptions and she had this fear of the unknown, as we've been talking about, based on the appearance of the hitchhiker.
No, I think that was significant. I think the appearance is very significant. And
absolutely.
By the way, tying back to Eye of the Beholder, I mean, Serling and his writing crew, they clearly note the significance of appearance throughout.
Absolutely, yes.
And so, just trying to get our arms around, Redford and not, obviously throughout his name because he's a big league A-lister legend, but that he had it, just the blonde hair, had an angelic look, and which
very disarming.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Satan was an angel too, though, right? So you didn't. I mean, that's the thing. He was this disarming, charming, and so you're always like, ugh. And then that's, and of course all of these episodes, since they're short, and they always kind of leave themselves open to, well, was Wanda died, but what was death like? What is the experience like? And so he gets the sense that, at least within the writer's mind, that it was a joyous occasion, and so she was in a better place, and there was never, and it's and you get a little concerned when she says, well, you tricked me.
Yep.
And you're like, okay, if he tricked her. But again, he at least indicated it was meant for her own good.
Yeah.
And
he even says I had to, because she wouldn't talk to me otherwise.
Right. And I don't think, and I'm not even just saying, well, we got to take his word for it. I think that was the theme that it was meant to be. And so that's really, when people, they always look for the twist. Most of the summaries, like AV Club or whatever, they say, the twist for this episode, the twist was blah, blah, blah. And for this one, the twist is, well, Robert Redford is the angel of death. But the twist is really that the angel of death had a mission of mercy.
Yeah.
And grace. And I think that is consistent with our scriptural conception.
Absolutely. And I think that's, this episode, I think one of the reasons why it is in the top, it has a twist ending, yes, but it leaves you with a sense of fulfilledness, and it leaves you with a sense of hope. They walk out into the sunlight, this thing that she hadn't touched or seen in years. There's a completeness now to her life in death that we as Christians resonate with. There's a completeness in our death that, while we don't long for death, we don't fear death. As Paul says, to be absent from the bodies in the presence of the Father, to live as Christ, to die as gain. Right. I'm good either way. And so we get this same kind of hopefulness that's very starkly different to what we get in The Hitchhiker. Right. That it's very neutral. It's very, I don't want to say unsettling, but it is very fulfilled.
I think that was the intent, because and there's a couple of things where, and we kind of, again, I think I probably gave it away a little early, the assumed twist of Nothing in the Dark. Although, again, I think we're really addressing the actual twist, which is that death was benevolent and death was good.
Right.
But whether you want to call it Mr. Death or not, but I think the tone and direction of that episode, that The Hitchhiker, the intent, the pow moment was, oh, I'm dead. And I think they probably wanted to, the writers were like, well, that's where we need to, because when she's on the phone, because you really, something's wrong.
Yep.
But you don't know what's wrong.
Yep. It's very supernatural seeing the same guy across country.
But you don't know, who he is. You don't know what's going, again, we're kind of in this, okay, that's bad. It's not really Cassandra syndrome, because she knows Ingrid knows it's bad. Nan knows it's bad. But you don't know how it's bad. And you think that it's going to be, I think the twist is, you think this is going to be, he is somehow a threat to her life.
Right.
He's not, because he is death and she has already died. And so that's the shocker. And then you get in the car and he goes, I think you're going my way. And when she does, it's so cruel. That to me is like, okay, yeah, if I'm the writer, I'm like, okay, that's where it ends. You really have to end it there. But there is this twist there, because we don't know that Mr. Death, we don't know the Hitchhiker is Mr. Death. We don't know that Mr. Death is going to be in that episode. But we do know that Mr. Death is a prominent, even if for some reason the writers in Nothing in the Dark, if Johnson had not made one of the characters Mr. Death was going to be prominent in it.
Yes.
So it's kind of a different flow, right? And so it isn't, The Hitchhiker is unsettling, but it's meant to be unsettling. And if we want, obviously these were not together, but they could almost be bookend episodes where you're like, okay, this is, and I originally thought we're going to look at Elegy soon. I originally thought that Elegy would be the good bookend for Nothing in the Dark, but this is an excellent bookend because, again, it's unsettling.
Yeah.
The Hitchhiker is unsettling and unexpected, and you're just kind of left, whereas Nothing in the Dark, you're left with a sense of joy and warm fuzzies, and everything's going to be fine. And of course, there's a lot of reasons for that. One of which is Wanda was early 70s, Nan was late 20s.
Yeah. Well, I definitely think that, a couple of things to say here. I definitely think that the writers are making firm stances and trying to say something about death. All these kind of primordial forces, fate, determinism, death, all these things like that. I think that they are trying to make statements, poignant statements about. And so, yes, you have these different iterations of death. Even in, One for the Angels, you have a totally different, persona of death, this death as almost a deal maker.
Yeah.
And so that they're trying to say something about them. But even in the case of, like you mentioned, Elegy, which we're going to talk about, I think, next, right?
Yep.
In the case of Elegy, and I don't want to give it away too early, but, there are elements here of fate and this acceptance of things that as we see the characters unfold and the events unfold, they're trying to make a statement about acceptance of fate, the acceptance of death, the acceptance of these things that we are having to watch as bystanders. And the question I think I have, and I'm actually saying this in real time to you as well as our listeners, as I'm wrestling through these things myself, is this a tapestry that they're weaving, or are they saying death and fate are situational? In other words, does every single person kind of have their own fate/death moment that they have to interact with, unique unto them? Or is fate and death and these other kind of determinized ideas,
yeah,
are we more part of this overall tapestry, and we see different elements of it at different times? Have they kind of always been the same thing, and we just see them uniquely unto ourselves?
Yeah, and then the other thing that we haven't touched on is how whichever one of those, and I think those are a couple of good ones that we can really use to kind of do a deeper dive into what I think you're referring to as kind of a deterministic conversation on determinism versus free will, and whether it's baked in or whether it's individual and open to that. And so that's a great topic to connect with Elegy.
Yeah.
But it also begs the question, and I think Wanda is a prime example. How does your relationship with the death influence how you live?
Oh, that's a great question. Yes.
And again, that's not, we know that's, this sphere is not the ultimate, right?
Mm-hmm.
For us, we don't live, but then I think that's kind of the point. Are you living eternally as a believer? Are you living for this world, but also in living eternally, are you able to overcome those fears that
absolutely
through God you should overcome?
Absolutely.
Or God should overcome for you. That's probably the best way to put it. And of course, Wanda is an example of someone who was not able to do that. And we don't know how long Wanda's been like the Wanda that we knew for 20 minutes. But was there an event that happened that caused that? Or was it just kind of her relationship with death and how she feared death? And I'm trying to work through and remember her monologue, if you will, the hand, the shining, what I call the shining sunny hand monologue.
Well, I think if I remember correctly, in that case, she was talking about, you see, and this goes all the way back to the beginning of our episodes, she's seeing the passage of time. She's seeing the changing that's happened. And she even says, I was beautiful once. People used to look at me favorably. I used to, stand in the sunlight. All these things. And of course, we picture beauty and even attraction or sun and warmth and all these things positively. Her world has shut down into this cold, darkened state because it seems like, reflectant of the person, she has become darkened and embittered and locked herself away. And so the transition is, I think she has gotten older. She has seen the passages and ravages of time as they have appealed to herself. And in doing so, she fears that and begins to lock herself away.
Yeah. And again, I think and I always say that is situational in a certain sense, because it's not only her age, because we know the actress Gladys Cooper was 73 when this came out. She died. She was 81 when she passed. So it's not only, obviously, age 73 is not young, but it's also being 73 when she was 73, because 73 now is much younger than it was in 1962.
Yep.
And of course, how the passage of time, even though she was, Gladys was an actress, we don't know what Wanda's background was, and we know Wanda probably was born in a very rural environment, perhaps, most likely. I'd say that. Now she's in this kind of this urban blight, and so there's this there's a chance for someone who might be either insane or even who's just sane but older to have placed themselves in what we might call a cranial dystopian existence. And so, there's a lot and so that is kind of hemmed in how she lives and how she sees the world. Yep. Well, good stuff. So I think we've covered all that. Any other thoughts or questions you have for me on this?
No, I think this is good. I think that, as we move on and transition into kind of looking at determinism and kind of, where that shearing line is between free will agency and versus predetermined actions and look at that going forward. I think this is going to be a great foundation as we see, because these things play so much heavily into those. Right.
In the control we think we have, and this kind of goes back to this episode, right? Nothing in the dark. The control we think we have over all that. And elegy is going to really play into that. So, and because it's not just, and that's really the argument between determinism and free will. What sort of control do we have over?
Yep. What level of control do I have?
What level of control do I have over my existence? And so that's and that's where we're going to pick up. So great, Absolutely. Good stuff. All right. All right, good stuff. Great episode. And boy, I love them. So thank you so much for letting me just walk through. I know it took you a while to find it, but just to walk through this episode, walk through one of my favorites. And Elegy's a recent vintage for me, and obviously for you too. But I think it's going to be a fun little. It's a weird episode. It's not beautiful like this. So, but this was a beautiful episode, and it just matched well with Hitchhiker. All right, that is episode 12, and so we're halfway through the season, and I hope everyone's enjoyed it or is enjoying it, and we have much more to go.
Absolutely.
So we are, but these topics of fate, determinism, our control over that, these are going to be pervasive. And so if you're enjoying this, let us know and give us feedback on your thoughts on that. And we're going to even move further into thoughts like the comparison trap, shame, these sorts of things. So enjoy, take a step back, and when you're ready, hop in and devour episode 13. Thanks.